Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Ahmet Aysan. It is my great privilege to moderate this session. I am not from the capital markets side. I was a board member of Turkish Central Bank and the Monetary Policy Committee member. But I appreciate the importance of the capital markets. And it's my great privilege to witness the 15th anniversary of the IOSCO and also 20th anniversary of the QFMA. And also, another great privilege is to moderate the first session, and this is the session starts with the Islamic finance. So this is one of the contribution, I believe, of QFMA and the Qatar. So that's why I would like to thank His Excellencies and especially Dr. Tami for making this conference a great initiative. I heard very good things about the last 3 days, and I hope with the first session, we will get lots of good insights. Islamic finance has started with the Islamic banking. But we are also in a critical time to dive into new dimensions. And capital markets is for sure the next wave which will enable the Islamic finance to get into the next stage. It is not just about Islamic finance, but globally, we used to, especially in developing countries, the financial markets were mainly based on the banking. But the banking is kind of an old story. Right now with the fintech, AI, and so on, there's a kind of a democratization of the finance, financial inclusion, and the capital markets are becoming more and more important. And it is not just about capital market, but capital markets are becoming also more sustainable, more responsible, and Islamic finance is one of the channels for this. Islamic finance is not just about having an interest-free, riba-free system. It is also about the values. And I am very pleased to moderate this session because it asks the value proposition of Islamic finance. And the value proposition is not just about the being interest-free. The value proposition is about how to be ethical, how to be value-driven. And this is not just a relevant thing for the Islamic finance people, but it is relevant for all conventional capital markets, even for conventional financial instruments, because right now things will not be just about determined by the price. We need to have some values, some principles to make the finance more sustainable, more responsible, and more inclusive and real market economy driven. So that's why I feel myself very honored and very privileged to moderate this session. I believe this is one of the historical moments where we have the 15th anniversary, 20th anniversary of authorities, and also starting the public event with a session on Islamic finance. I am a relatively more liberal regulator of the past and also a liberal moderator, and I don't want to speak for the rest of the time because we are here to listen our very distinguished speakers, and that's why I will try to give you more time. So let me stop here and let me start with Ms. Paula. Ms. Paula is the only female in the session, and also she is the only one representing the private sector. And Luxembourg was always at the frontier of Islamic finance. I remember from early years, the governor of the Luxembourg Central Bank was one of the founders of International Islamic Liquidity Management Company. And we were one of the founders as well. And Luxembourg is always one of the early countries, for example, issues Sukuk. So it is not a coincidence that Ms. Paula is here today. And that's why she's quite also into Islamic finance. She knows the details. So let me start, Ms. Paula, with you. And then what are the key challenges in integrating the Islamic finance principles to global financial markets? Luxembourg is a very global place. It's a small country, but it's a very global financial hub. And I know that you have done a lot in terms of regulating and also in terms of the private sector practices. And as a person representing the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, what are your views about the challenges and how to integrate the Islamic finance to the global financial system? Please.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to be here in Qatar. Thank you for the invitation. to join this impressive conference and to contribute very humbly to the discussion about Islamic finance, the Sukuk market. Thanks a lot also to my co-panelists. It's an honor to actually share the floor and engage into the discussion. Going to your point, challenges. Islamic finance and the Sukuk market in particular are actually grounded in specific ethical and jurisprudential principles, and this requires careful interpretation in terms of the global financial approach. And in terms of challenges, I do see some challenges, in particular, first, the regulatory complexity. We have different interpretations of what a sukuk is. It is a bond, a financial instrument. It's not. What it's in terms of the performance, in terms of different scholars' interpretations, schools, movements. So for the international capital markets, it would be important actually to seek some clarification in terms of the nature, because legal trust predictability, it's important, of course, for the global investor world. Secondly, the lack of harmonization. We do have different standards. We are currently facing a discussion regarding Standard 62 and what actually it will entail for the Sukuk and Islamic finance market in terms of framing the Sukuk as an asset-based vis-à-vis asset-backed instrument. So lack of or limited standardization is, of course, a challenge that needs to be faced. And then I would say literacy, the lack of awareness, in particular from non-Islamic investors, of the topic, the importance of the topic for diversification of portfolios, for instance. So how shall we actually tackle it, right? So I do see the need for a more robust and streamlined regulatory policy-oriented framework. I do see the need for enhanced literacy and also maybe trying to innovate with some labeled bonds type in terms of making a convergency approach towards green sukuk, for instance, so some labeled instruments as green social bonds, which can be linked with the sukuk structured. And last but not the least, the coordination and the convergency around the ecosystem. Regulators, market infrastructures as stock exchanges, CSDs, ICSDs, and CCPs, of course, that all these ecosystems need actually to be aligned. And I think the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, as our moderator mentioned, and Luxembourg have played an important role in terms of enhancing the Islamic and the Sukuk market. The Luxembourg Stock Exchange was the stock exchange which listed the first global Malaysia Sukuk in 2002, so more than 20 years. Which was followed by the Qatar Global Sukuk. So now we are here in Qatar. In 2003, we listed the first Sukuk, Global Qatar Sukuk. Then Dubai also. And to express the willingness to participate in the global Sukuk market, Luxembourg, the sovereign itself, issued in 2014 sovereign sukuk, which actually was very well received into the market at that moment in time. So Luxembourg actually is pioneering for the first bonds, first sukuks in terms of Islamic finance, in terms of green finance. Back in 2006 and 2007, we listed the first green bond issued by the European Investment Bank, the green bond issued by the World Bank. So we are familiar of the firsts, and we actually try not to be the first, but embrace the challenge of the journey. And we, of course, would be very, very pleased to continue the journey, facing all the challenges in terms of regulatory policy, giving trust, transparency into the market. And I think where stock exchanges can play an important role is really in the transparency angle, because we actually put together issuers and investors and bring visibility to securities, making available all the documentation, price stability, price discovering, both primary and secondary market. And I think this is actually quite important for the success of Islamic and the Sukuk market in particular.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Paolo. Especially on the Sukuk side, and it is still a growing market. There are some regulatory issues, especially with the IFE's recent regulation. That's why it is even more important that the Sukuks are listed in the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, because it is a more of an international asset class, and it is still developing, and I'm sure Luxembourg regulators, the stock market will play a big role. And one of the key developments also, I believe, is taking place in Turkey. Turkey is, in the last 5 years or so, emphasizing more on the IPO stock market developments. And certainly, Mr. Ömer Gönül is one of the leading figures. He has done a lot in terms of listing new companies in Turkish Borsa Istanbul. And they have lots of regulations, and they are very much working hard in terms of being integrated to the rest of the world. And I know that one of the main development in Turkey is about the Islamic finance, and that's how, let me turn to Mr. Gönül. Mr. Ömer Gönül, what is your view about the role of Islamic finance, main competitive advantage in terms of providing financial stability and financial risk management, and your insights from Turkey, please? Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Dr. Aysan, it's nice to be here in Doha with you, with those very valuable friends. First of all, I would like to say the capital markets is growing in Turkey, especially in Borsa Istanbul. We have about 37 IPOs last year, and not just for these, but also Islamic instruments, Islamic bonds, Islamic sukuk, and other instruments are still growing in our market. When we look at the Islamic instruments, we especially see that according to conventional market instruments and banking, Islamic instruments are giving people a more transparent investment opportunities. When we go to the Islamic instrument, we see that also sharing the risk and giving enough opportunities to grow in real markets are the best parts of these Islamic instruments. A strong ethical foundation, fair conduct, risk sharing, and asset-backed transactions are the most important parts of Islamic instruments, and we see that more people are nowadays are learning and want to get with these instruments all over the world. So, with the Borsa Istanbul and Capital Markets Board of Turkey, we are trying to give our best efforts to give this market a bigger share in investment world. For the economic development parts, the real world companies, the real world assets are getting a bigger share and finding its way to get in the investment market. So the Islamic ways of investing in the market by these equities and bonds are finding their ways on their bigger investment opportunities. Islamic financial products bring the potential to add dynamism to real-world economy, I said. As what you invest and how you invest and the transparency of these investments are giving people to know that there will be tomorrow risks, but also the gains in halal way. But these are going to be the most important instruments. For example, İşare sukuk can be used to acquire franchising through the lease of real property, whereas murabba sukuk is used trading a commodity where payment is done in installations through the SPVs that issues instruments. On the other hand, murabba sukuk, which we published very much, involves profit and risk sharing in a venture. And istisna sukuk is particularly suitable to finance the construction of infrastructure projects. By these instruments, illiquid assets to become more liquid assets in our perspective. First sukuk insurance, as you know, started in Malaysia in 1990s. After the crisis of 2008, financial crisis bring another view to these Islamic bonds and sukuks. In 2010, global instance gained momentum, and we start to, as a CMB, we start to publish these sukuks and give them to Borsa Istanbul with great honor. Since then, the global economy has gone through multiple turbulences, as you know, including a pandemic, geopolitical tensions, and wars causing uncertainty and volatility. With these instruments of Islamic sukuk, we believe that we can just find its way to better on this. The risk management and other things with these instruments will find its way for the investors to get better decisions. Throughout this challenge landscape, Islamic finance in general and sukuk in particular have remained resilient as a means of financing in global markets through the past 15 years. And one of the main reasons why the Islamic instruments also getting more attractive, they are also with sustainable finance. So we believe that as a CMB, there's always a very much way to go in these sukuk instruments and other Sharia instruments. So we are working on them nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ömer, His Excellency. Really, we observe the great developments in Turkey from the regulatory side. And you know, the regulatory side is the initial stage where the fundamentals are set. And I believe that in the years to come, we will see how these capital markets will dominate the financial sector. And it's a very good start for Turkey. And thank you for your great achievement and contributions. But one of the most important contribution probably came from Malaysia as early as 1980s, as Mr. Ömer has mentioned. That's why Mr. Mohammed Faiz is the last but not the least. So I wonder about the developments in Malaysia in terms of the challenges, because you bring the Islamic financial capital markets to a very high levels as compared to other countries. And there are a lot to learn from Malaysia. And I wonder about the challenges and the main benefits that the Islamic finance has brought to Malaysia over the last 40, 50 years probably. Mr. Mohammed Faiz, floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good morning. I'd like to first thank QFMA for inviting me to speak on this panel. I was having a look at your website to see what you've been doing, and a lot of very good things, particularly on the capacity side. I'm also very pleased to see that all your regulatees are here today too, so that's always good. Now, I have a slightly different view, because whenever we talk on an Islamic finance panel, it's always about challenges and difficulties, and it doesn't quite standardize. I think we need to go back to why we're doing this. Malaysia started this journey well back in the 60s when we set up the Pilgrims Fund. And we realized that people were hiding money in their mattresses rather than putting it to a bank, or if they put it to a bank, they would donate the interest. So this is in the 1960s, and so we decided, no, you have to save money for Hajj, you can't borrow money, so we're going to set up an institution that basically takes your money, invest it for you, and help you grow your fund to come on Hajj. That's how it all started. So our first principle was, how do we ensure that if a Muslim wants to carry out their financial matters in an Islamically appropriate way, they can? So if you kind of measure the time, 30, 40 years, I think we've achieved the first goal. Every Muslim in Malaysia can get a housing loan, a car loan, insurance, wealth management products, which are Islamically compatible, okay? So, and I can't take credit for that, that's more the central bank, but in the capital markets, we've done our little bit. The second objective that we started thinking about was, it cannot be that these products are only for Muslims. So we've got to figure out, because we're a country of what, 35 million people, 67% are Muslim, 33% are not, and the wealth is, in all various racial classes. So to encourage the 33% to also buy into these Islamic products, we needed to figure out how to ensure that they feel that they will be treated equally. So we decided these issues, mu'amalat, will be dealt with in the High Court, not the Sharia court. We passed a law saying that judges cannot decide on halal haram, only the SAC, the Sharia Advisory Council, can say this, so it's non-justicable. And we also put in certain precepts in law to say, essentially, we don't care who you are, you will be protected the same way. It's very much like the ISCO principle of same activities, same risks, same regulatory outcomes. And it's kind of worked. 50 years on, 40% of the banking assets which are Islamic are actually held by, 40% of the Islamic banking assets are held by non-Muslims. Okay? The third one is more peculiar to the capital markets. We will be an aged society in 20 years' time. So we're looking at something the Americans call the replacement rate, meaning if you take your last drawn salary, how much of that will you be able to get when you retire? The Americans say 80% is a good number, but that means still you have to reduce your lifestyle by 20% to be able to survive retirement. The average replacement rate in Malaysia is 30 to 40%. And then when I look, what are their assets that they're going to rely on when they retire? A lot of it sits in the capital markets. So that's now the third principle. How do I make sure that Islamic assets return dividends, return profit, equivalent, if not more, than conventional? Because a lot of the Muslim holders of provident funds or people who buy assets, invariably want higher returns. So that's the third one that we're still trying to figure out. Now, if I look at challenges, I tend to look at it from a different lens. We have a thing in Malaysia that I refer to as STAR. For anything Islamic, whether sukuk, whether a loan or whatever, it has to be able to comply with 4 different aspects. I call it STAR: Sharia, tax, accounting, regulation. So on the Sharia part, it's very clear. We unusually, because I know in the Middle East it's not common, but we actually have a central Sharia body. In fact, we have 2, SAC Bank Negara and SAC Securities Commission. However, we make sure they're common members so they have the same view. The reason why we have the SAC is to police the scholars. You know, it's not for me to tell a scholar he's wrong. It's much better if a scholar tells a scholar he's wrong. So we use the SAC as a way of making sure there's consistency. And it may not be knowledgeable from a point of view of knowing how scholars work, but scholars are lawyers. So a fatwa can be challenged if the person issuing it is not experienced enough, expert enough. But a fatwa can also be challenged if, let's say, a particular topic, there are 3 hadiths and 4 surahs on it, and it doesn't deal with it in the fatwa. Technically, that fatwa is void. Now, I'm not in a position to say that. It's better for the SAC to look at it. So that Sharia part is good, and as I mentioned, this is not a matter that secular courts deal with. We leave it to the SAC to determine it. And also, we spend a lot of time as regulators registering scholars, so we don't have, fake scholars, as it were, and also regulating them, because some of them seem to get themselves involved in things which I think are not appropriate. So that part we do regulate. So that's the S part, the Sharia part. And so I know that every product that comes up for discussion has gone through a process where someone has looked to make sure it is Sharia compliant. Tax. Now, we live in a secular world. We pay taxes. We have real property taxes. And unfortunately, a lot of Islamic transactions involve the movement of assets. So we solved it by passing a law that said, if the same Islamic instrument was made conventional and didn't pay that tax, then you wouldn't pay the tax either, just because it's Islamic. So that tax neutrality means, again, it's certainty to the investor, meaning he's not going to pay more taxes because of doing Islamic. It's tax neutral, okay? And I have to say, tax is the one that, always gets us very involved, because if you don't get it right at the beginning, you just spend years in court trying to sort it out later. So we try to get that certainty up front. The next one is accounting. Now, you might think it's a bit strange, but Malaysia is an IFRS country. So we were very concerned that the way the IFRSs were worded, it seemed to exclude certain elements of Islamic finance. For example, we had this problem with wa'ad. What is wa'ad? It's a promise enforceable by God, but not enforceable here. So then we spent a long time trying to decide, how do you value a wa'ad? And we came to the conclusion we can't. So we decided to make it disappear. So maybe after this conference, I'll tell you how we make wa'ad disappear. Because wa'ads are used a lot in takafuls. So we sat down with the ISB and went through our transactions. And to our delight, the ISB were very open. So they have tweaked their IFRS standards to accommodate a lot of the Islamic transactions. In fact, they actually had until recently, I think it was running for about 8 years, and I was chairman for 6, a committee at ISB that looked at Islamic transactions and figured out what was the appropriate IFRS treatment. So that's the accounting part. Regulation is really about trust. Many of these products are certified by a scholar, and we have to make sure that the scholars do their job. So I mentioned about the SAC, but we also come up with guidelines as to who is an appropriate scholar. We also talk about their training. In fact, I'm opening a nadwa on Monday where we're teaching scholars about climate change. And this is something we'll talk about later about ESG, because I realize my scholars don't understand the topic. So in fact, here's an interesting philosophical question. How many signs of Qiyamah are similar to climate? well, I'll let you think about that one. The one I can't understand is the sun, coming up in the west and setting in the east. That one's a bit difficult to explain. But actually, there are a lot of similarities. And we want to have a discussion with the scholars, because one of the things that we feel is that we need to use zakat money for some of these climate adaptation projects. So that's where I'll end, which is to say that I don't see these issues necessarily as problematic, except for AUFI Standard 62. That one is going to be a real fun one. And already I've set a challenge to my scholars saying, well, if indeed asset-based sukuks will be banned, then what's the alternative? Because there's still a need. Not every company has a large asset to put into an SPV. So what do you do about those companies? And why it's important is that most Sharia screening criteria will say that if you have more than 1/3 debt, you're not Sharia compliant. So of course then they run to sukuks because it's Sharia compatible. But if they can't, then what do they do, right? Yeah. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mohammed Faizi. We will discuss this in SOAS, by the way. In June, we are one of the organizers, and Qatar Financial Center is one of the sponsors. Each and every year, we organize a workshop on different issues, and this year's issue is about this IOP 62 resolution and so on. It's a big issue, so you are all invited if you are interested. As Hamad bin Khalifa University College of Islamic Studies, we are one of the co-organizers. But one very good starting point, I believe, Mr. Mohammed Faizi has started. We always talk about the challenges, difficulties of Islamic finance. First, we have to be more constructive, more positive. And I believe Islamic finance is a very good example. All these challenges and historical background that Mr. Mohammed Faizi has talked about is actually showing us that Islam is a living religion. There are challenges and then we respond to it. And there are new products, we respond to it. And certainly, for example, for about 3 weeks ago, there was an Orientalism conference in Qatar. And mashallah, Qatar is a leading country in that regard. And one of the arguments of the Orientalism is as if the East is dead, it is a static place. But I believe, just from the example of Islamic finance, Islam is a living religion. It always faced with the new challenges and respond to these challenges. And even one of these challenges about sukuk, for example, and the Sharia scholars somewhat changed their opinion. Now it's a challenge. So we have to come up with a solution, and it shows that it is not like Orientalists has proposed in the past. Islam is not a static religion. It's a dynamic religion. It is part of the changing system. And Alhamdulillah, Mohammed Faizi, I believe, has a very good positive approach. Especially, again, let me emphasize, as Islamic economists, whenever you go to Islamic finance conferences, sometimes we talk about there is too much convergence, there is too much this and that. What the Islamic finance is doing is not necessarily proper. But at the same time, this is something that we achieve. This is one of the most important things probably we achieve as the Muslim world in the last 50 years. We didn't have the banks, we didn't have the capital markets. Right now, we are talking about something that has been generated in the last 50 years, and certainly Malaysia is one of the leading figures there. So let me come to Ms. Paula again. This is an Islamic finance session, but Islamic finance is quite related with the sustainability, governance, ESGs. And I have a proposition that actually, right now finance is trying to be more sustainable, but the sustainability discussions have been around mostly in the last 20 years. But when first Islamic economics came with the idea of the value proposition. We cannot leave everything to the market. We should have our various principles. And then we should do the finance accordingly. And right now, sustainable finance, ESG and so on are actually trying to do the same. And sometimes I say that there was an Islamic economics before sustainable economics or sustainable finance. So I wonder about your views, how we can at least speak with ESG from an Islamic finance angle, or how do you see the similarities, differences? Do you see a scope there for further collaboration with the conventional or global financial system?
Absolutely. I see actually a huge convergency approach in terms of Islamic finance, sukuk markets, and ESG, the environmental, social, and governance aspects. Actually, I think Islamic finance is inherently green, just to simplify. Well, what do I mean? I mean that those ethical principles and interpretations actually have similar and commonalities in terms of the sustainable finance world. And I would like to invite you to revisit the beginning of sustainable finance, at least from a European point of view and our experience as sustainable and at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and in particular the green bond market. When actually the first green bond was issued, there was no particular guidance, or there were no particular principles. But precisely to create more and more trust into the market, a set of principles nowadays reflected in EU regulation were set up precisely to provide trust. And those principles actually are based on transparency, on building trust. And to build transparency, you need to give market participants information. So what basically the ICMA, the International Capital Markets Association, did was to set a kind of pillars in terms of transparency, disclosure, also registration, the certification of some, not scholars, but kind of scholars in Islamic finance in terms of providing a third-party independent review on the framework. So how this was reflected at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange? In 2016, precisely building on our experience but listing green, social, sustainable bonds from sovereigns, multilateral development banks, corporates, of course, we actually set not a principle, but based on existing principles, we set some requirements to have eligible securities on our green exchange. A green exchange is not a separate exchange of the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. It's really a segment in which we embrace all securities with some certain green, social, sustainable, and now more recently sustainability-linked features to provide visibility. I always like to use the image of a supermarket. When you go to a supermarket in general, you have those conventional products and ingredients. But if you are looking for some organic or green, you actually have a specific corner where you know that there you will find everything that you want to achieve. Those products were certified, they went through due diligence process, and this is exactly what we are trying to do at the level of capital markets and at the level of stock exchanges, to provide visibility to those specific products. But it's come with some additional requirements, not necessarily costly, but actually additional requirements in terms of transparency. First, you need to have your green bond framework, which needs actually to be available for market participants and reviewed by a third party, an independent party, which will validate the alignment of the securities towards the set of principles that the issuer wants to abide. And then afterwards, 1 year after, we actually ask for a location report, and very important, an impact report. And this is where I think there are some similarities with, for instance, the Sukuk, because there is this negative screening, but then what about the impact? Is the impact actually being assessed or not? I think this is where we can actually move forward, a step forward in terms of the impact assessment of the underlying, either from a conventional green or Sukuk perspective. So all in all, I think we can learn from the development of sustainable finance, and leverage on actually what we did right, what we didn't actually did so right, but we are actually improving, and the market is growing. So I see lots of potential convergence between the Islamic sukuk finance and financial instruments vis-à-vis the sustainable finance world.
Thank you, Ms. Paula. Let me move to His Excellency, Mr. Ömer. Always there is an issue in Islamic finance about standardization, especially when we try to make the products more global. The standardization is very important, and we are part of this IOSCO meeting, and one of the purposes of this IOSCO, as it is mentioned in the keynote addresses, is the standardization. When you are doing the regulation on Islamic finance, how do you tackle this issue of standardization, and what are the, again, I will ask the challenges, but one way or another it's a challenge from the perspective of the regulator, and I wonder your insights in how you tackle this issue in the case of Turkey.
Well, for this challenges is one of the most important one, is the standardization. Because when we look at the world, there's a lack of standardization, so we have to choose our way to use the standards. So, what we are doing is, we have, as you know, just let me check for the English word for it. Advisory Board in Participation Banks Association of Turkey. We have this, only we use the standard of their published works. Share certificate issuance and trade standards, you know. So we are using this standard, but as my colleague has said, we need interlinks for standardization. We need to use or tell what we are using, the standards about this system. The most important challenge for our view in Turkey, we cannot explain what's the difference between these Islamic instruments and the conventional banking instruments. They are always asking what's the difference between them. The financial literacy here comes in a way, so we are telling what's the difference between them and what is a sukuk depends on. What's on the background of the sukuk. We are always having difficulty about telling these also the investors and the international buyers and sellers. So dramatically, we are telling the issuers about what's going on behind these instruments, Islamic instruments, what's the difference. So the most important about these challenges to tell the investors and the publishers all about what's behind them. So all our effort is all about this. And also another challenge which we'll face is the liquidity problem. There is no enough depth in this liquidity of these instruments. So we are trying to do with our best, but in international concept, there we still see that there is no liquidity pool as the conventional banking system. So with these challenges, we are trying to get the market bigger. So because we know the Malaysia has been a bigger market, so we are trying to follow what's going on there. Thank you. They are helping us a lot, but still there's a way to go in the European side, I hope, and the Middle East about the liquidation. I think that's all for us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ömer, His Excellency, this liquidity, I guess, will be always an issue, and that's why probably we need more to do more emphasis on standardization. Once it's a global market, liquidity issues will be more resolved, and that's why we have even international institutions like ILLM and so on. And I hope that I always say this, really, we are at the beginning. I mean, don't think about Islamic finance like a very saturated market. Still, Islamic finance products are always growing with double-digit numbers globally. And this is a good thing from our perspective, because we are really witnessing something which is progressing. And inshallah, your efforts are very important for this. Last but not least, again, we are a bit over time, I know, but Mr. Mohammed Faizi, you have a lot. You mentioned that you bring the Islamic scholars and you are teaching, or you are somewhat training them on the ESG and governance. And I guess, and your perspective on the Qiyamah, and then linking it with the environment is quite interesting. I wonder, what do you do on the ESG side as a regulator in Malaysia, and what are the lessons probably that we can all share? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's take an ASEAN perspective. We all have green bonds. In fact, I think Thailand's done probably a lot more than we have. And I think we've also had sukuks in Malaysia that relate to the green agenda. The problem is that we haven't been able to raise that much money. And what worries me is that if the sea level is going to rise by a meter, then that's pretty much it for ASEAN, because all our cities are by the coast. Indonesia and Philippines probably have 20,000 islands among them. And when I talk to my Filipino colleagues, they tell me that the typhoons are much stronger now than they were 15 years ago, and so more destruction. So at the ASEAN level, we've decided to create a guidance to the ASEAN taxonomy called MARS. MARS stands for Mitigation, Co-Benefit, Adaptation, Resilience, and Sustainable Financing. And what we're trying to do is to explain within the ASEAN taxonomy, which really talks about commercial projects. You know, how do you convert a coal-fired plant to a renewable energy? That's commercial. But who's going to build my seawall? Seawalls have no return. So that's why using MARS, we're using that as a lens to look at all the available sources of funding, not just government, not just states, not just municipals, community, philanthropy, zakat, even waqafs, to basically figure out how do we pay for this adaptation that we need. Seawalls, coastal reservoirs, canal systems, you name it, because the problem in Asia is principally one of too much water or too little water. Okay, so that's one at the ASEAN level. At a Malaysian level, we have a problem, because every time we talk to the scholars, they talk about halal, haram, or tayyib. And that discussion doesn't really resonate with people who talk about ESG. So in 2023, in September, we issued something we call Maqasid al-Sharia, according to the Securities Commission. And really what that tried to do was to kind of widen the discussion to show the relevance of Islamic finance in other questions. So with your permission, so if you go to our website, you can find this. Basically, it's taking little bits of Sharia and trying to focus on certain questions. So for example, if I look at emissions, Principle 3, undertaking initiatives in preserving the well-being of future generations. So really, we are custodians, not owners of the earth. But it also asks the question, are we consuming too much and not leaving our children with anything? So that is to kind of force us to think, are there projects, are there things that we need to finance that addresses that? And it would be around environmental impact and maybe banning the use of certain things. So that principle forces us to think about the E part. If you talk about the S, so we've got two, Principle 14 and 15, maximizing wealth distribution with a focus on social finance. Principle 13, broadening the circulation of wealth and participation. So it's unusual for a security regulator, but we're creating a social exchange, so charities have access to funds. We are also getting involved in SMEs, because we realize that most of the country's GDP and employment is with the SMEs. Normally, we only look at listed companies. So now we're looking at the 18,333 medium-tier companies to see what we can do to assist them. And then when you come to G, well, there's lots in G. For example, Principle 6, upholding best practices, codes of conduct and ethical values. Principle 7, adhering to the validity and objective of contracts. Principle 8, your favorite, enhancing disclosure and documentation. Principle 10, honoring freedom of transactions and dealings. And finally, Principle 11, upholding fiduciary duty with the utmost good faith. So all this is really to create like another taxonomy, saying when you say you're a good Muslim or you're a good Islamic banker, you demonstrate how you've applied these 15 principles. So to make it go forward, we're working with Professor Mehmet of Durham University. You might know him. So he's actually curating a course in Malaysia for all the banks and stockbrokers to attend, to understand what do we mean by maqasid and what should they be doing. I believe we've had about 5 or 6 issuance recently that have explained the principles and how they've used it. And I believe Professor Mehmet is going to repeat the same course in Durham. So if any of you are interested to know about maqasid al-Sharia, that's one source. So that's how we're trying to move the agenda along, which is really trying to explain to people what is the relevance of Islam in this question.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed Faizi. So we are running out of time a bit, but still it's always good to get some questions from the audience. I guess we have some time to get the questions, right? A couple of questions probably. Would you like to ask some questions to our very distinguished speakers? If you can raise your hands, probably. I don't know. We apparently. So, any questions? No. Thank you very much. I would like to thank again to His Excellency Sheikh Bandar Al Thani, the Chairman of QFMA, Dr. Tami Al Binali. We are really in a historical time. We are at the mid of the quarter of the century, 15th anniversary of IOSCO, 20th anniversary of QFMA. And I believe Qatar made a good landmark to be remembered later. And I again would like to thank the speakers, all the organizers, and thank you very much again for being part of this. Let's give a pause of applause for the speakers.